My name is Jessica, and Derek and I had what everyone called a fairy tale romance. We met in college when I was studying marketing, and he was working construction to pay for his business classes. While other girls chased the fraternity boys with their daddy's money, I fell for Derek's calloused hands and honest smile. He wasn't the richest or the most sophisticated, but he made me feel like a queen. Derek would surprise me with hand-picked wildflowers from construction sites, write me sweet notes on napkins during his lunch breaks, and work double shifts just to take me somewhere special on weekends. When I got stressed about exams, he'd massage my shoulders for hours. When I was sick, he'd skip work to bring me soup and hold my hair back when I was nauseous. "You're going to be somebody important," he'd tell me, stroking my hair as we lay in his tiny dorm room. "And I'm going to work my ass off to give you everything you deserve." The proposal was perfect. Nothing fancy, just Derek on one knee in the same park where we'd had our first date, promising to love me forever. The ring was modest, but he'd saved for 8 months to buy it, working overtime and eating ramen for dinner so he could afford something beautiful for me. Our wedding was small, but magical. Derek's construction buddies served as groomsmen, and his boss even let us use his backyard for the reception. Derek cried when he saw me in my dress, not expensive, but the most beautiful gown in the world, according to him. During our first dance, he whispered, "I can't believe I get to call you my wife for the rest of my life." Those early years were everything I dreamed of. Derek built our first home himself, working nights and weekends to create our perfect little starter house. He'd come home covered in sawdust and exhausted, but his face would light up when he saw me. "Come see what I finished today," he'd say excitedly, leading me to admire another room he'd crafted with his own hands. When I got pregnant with Sophie, Derek treated me like precious china. He'd draw me baths after work, rub my swollen feet, and talk to my belly every night. "Daddy's working hard to make everything perfect for you," he'd whisper to my stomach. He painted the nursery 3 times until it was exactly right. After Sophie was born, Derek would get up for every midnight feeding, insisting I needed my rest. I'd watch him pace our bedroom at 2 a.m., this big, strong man gently bouncing our tiny daughter while singing off-key lullabies. "She's got your beautiful eyes," he'd tell me every single day, as if he was seeing her for the first time. When Jake came along 3 years later, Derek was just as devoted. He'd take both kids to the park every Saturday morning so I could sleep in, then bring me coffee in bed and tell me about their adventures. "Sophie taught Jake how to swing today," he'd say proudly. "Our kids are going to be best friends, just like their parents." But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing Derek's efforts as romantic and started seeing them as routine. When he'd bring me flowers, I'd think about how predictable he was. When he'd want to cuddle and watch movies, I'd get irritated that he wasn't more sophisticated. The same hands that used to make me feel cherished now seemed rough and uneducated when he'd touch me. I started comparing our life to what I saw on social media. Friends posting pictures from wine country vacations while we went camping, couples at fancy restaurants while Derek and I ate at family diners, women showing off designer handbags while I carried a practical purse from Target. "Why can't we go somewhere nice for once?" I'd complain when Derek suggested another weekend at the lake. "We're saving for the kids' college funds," he'd remind me gently. "But if you really want to go somewhere special, I can pick up some extra shifts." I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt trapped by his practicality, suffocated by his contentment with our simple life. I wanted more excitement, more luxury, more attention. Derek was still working 60-hour weeks, still bringing me coffee in bed, still telling me I was beautiful every day. But I had stopped hearing it, stopped appreciating it, stopped seeing the love behind every gesture. "You never surprise me anymore," I'd tell him, even though he surprised me constantly with little thoughtful acts. What I really meant was that his surprises weren't grand enough, expensive enough, sophisticated enough for the woman I thought I'd become. Derek would look confused and hurt. "What kind of surprises do you want?" he'd ask. I didn't know. I just knew that what he was giving me, his complete devotion, his unwavering love, his every waking moment dedicated to our family, somehow wasn't enough anymore. By our 8th year of marriage, I had become a different person than the girl who fell in love with Derek's honest heart. Success in my part-time marketing job had given me confidence, but also arrogance. I started believing I was too sophisticated for my blue-collar husband, too evolved for our suburban life. When Derek would come home exhausted from managing 3 construction crews, covered in dirt and smelling like honest work, I'd wrinkle my nose and tell him to shower before dinner. When he'd try to tell me about his day, the challenges of keeping projects on schedule, the satisfaction of seeing a building take shape, I'd half listen while scrolling through my phone. You used to be interested in my work, he said one evening, catching me checking Instagram while he talked about landing a big contract. I still am, I lied, not even looking up from pictures of my college friend's trip to Paris. The truth was, I had started to feel embarrassed by Derek's job. At the country club where I'd started working part time, the other women talked about their husbands' careers in finance, law, medicine. When someone asked what Derek did, I'd say he's in construction with a slight tone of apology, as if his honest work was something shameful. Derek began to notice my growing distance. He'd try harder to connect, suggesting date nights or weekend getaways, but I'd find excuses. I was tired, busy with work, needed time with girlfriends. The man who had once been my best friend was becoming an inconvenience in my life. I feel like I'm losing you, Derek said one night, reaching for my hand across the dinner table. Did I do something wrong? I should have seen the pain in his eyes, should have recognized how hard he was trying to save our marriage. Instead, I pulled my hand away and said, "You're being dramatic. I'm just growing as a person." What I really meant was that I was growing away from him, and I was too selfish to care how much it was hurting the man who loved me. That's when Ethan Cross entered my life like a drug I didn't know I needed. Everything about him was the opposite of Derek: polished, sophisticated, dangerous. Where Derek was solid and reliable, Ethan was mysterious and unpredictable. Where Derek wore work boots and jeans, Ethan wore Italian leather shoes and tailored suits that probably cost more than Derek made in a month. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. While Derek was home giving the kids baths and reading bedtime stories, I was at the country club bar being seduced by a man who made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. "You're incredibly intelligent," Ethan said, leaning closer as I told him about a marketing campaign I'd designed. "Most women I meet can barely hold a conversation about anything meaningful." Derek told me I was smart all the time, but coming from Ethan, this worldly, sophisticated man, it felt different. More real somehow, more important. "Your husband must be proud to have such a talented wife," Ethan said, but the way he said it made it sound like a question, like he doubted Derek could truly appreciate what he had. "He thinks my job is just a hobby," I replied, which wasn't true at all. Derek was incredibly proud of my work and often bragged about my successes to his friends and family. Ethan shook his head sympathetically. "Men like that don't understand women like you. You need someone who can match your intellect, who can challenge you." It was all manipulation, but I was so hungry for this kind of attention, so desperate to feel special and desired in a way that felt new and exciting, that I absorbed every word like gospel truth. What Ethan gave me was something I hadn't even realized I was craving: the feeling of being pursued, of being someone's obsession rather than someone's comfortable companion. Derek's love had become like breathing, essential but unnoticed. Ethan's attention was like champagne, intoxicating and addictive. He would text me throughout the day. "Can't stop thinking about our conversation last night. You look stunning in that blue dress. Counting the hours until I see you again." Messages that made my heart race in a way it hadn't for years. Derek would text me too. "Hope you're having a good day, beautiful. Love you." But his messages felt routine, expected. Ethan's felt urgent, passionate, dangerous. When I was with Ethan, I felt like the star of my own movie. He would look at me like I was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen, hang on every word I said, make me feel witty and beautiful and absolutely irresistible. He would order expensive wine and tell me stories about traveling through Europe, about art galleries and five-star restaurants, and a lifestyle I'd only dreamed of. "You should be drinking champagne every day," he told me during one of our lunch meetings. "You should be wearing silk and pearls, staying in luxury hotels. You deserve to be treated like a goddess." Derek treated me well, but practically. He'd bring me coffee, not champagne. He'd buy me comfortable shoes for walking with the kids, not designer heels. He'd plan camping trips, not European vacations. Suddenly, all of Derek's thoughtful gestures seemed pedestrian compared to Ethan's grand romantic vision. I've traveled all over the world, Ethan would tell me, and I've never met anyone like you. You have this fire, this passion that most people never find. It's being wasted in suburbia. The way he said suburbia made my life with Derek sound like a prison sentence rather than the loving home my husband had worked so hard to create for us. Ethan was a master at creating artificial intimacy. He would ask me deep questions about my dreams, my fears, my desires, conversations Derek and I used to have when we were first married, but had stopped having somewhere along the way amidst the routine of raising children and managing a household. "What do you want from life?" Ethan asked during one of our increasingly frequent coffee meetings. "Not what you think you should want, but what you really desperately desire." It was a question Derek hadn't asked me in years, though not because he didn't care, because he thought he already knew, because we'd already built our life together based on shared dreams and goals. But sitting across from Ethan in that dim coffee shop, I felt like I was being seen and understood for the first time in years. "I want to feel alive," I heard myself saying. "I want to feel like I matter, like I'm not just going through the motions." "You do matter," Ethan said intensely, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You matter so much more than you know." The electricity of his touch was shocking. When Derek held my hand, which he still did regularly, it felt warm and comfortable. When Ethan touched me, it felt like fire. "I think about you constantly," he admitted, his thumb tracing across my knuckles. "I know I shouldn't. I know this is complicated, but I can't help myself. There's something about you that's captured me completely." I should have pulled my hand away, should have told him this was inappropriate, that I was married, that I needed to go home to my family. Instead, I let his touch burn through me and whispered, "I think about you too." The lies started small and grew exponentially, but what made them truly evil was how I used Derek's own love and trust against him. When Derek asked why I was working so many extra hours, I didn't just lie about work. I made him feel guilty for questioning me. "You don't trust me?" I'd ask with fake hurt in my voice. "After everything I do for this family, you're going to interrogate me about working hard?" Derek would immediately apologize, feeling terrible for doubting his devoted wife. I was manipulating his guilt to cover my betrayal, using his love as a weapon against him. When he noticed I was dressing differently, sexier clothes, more makeup, expensive perfume, I turned it into an attack on his masculinity. "I guess you preferred when I looked frumpy. Sorry for trying to take care of myself." "You always look beautiful," Derek would say desperately. "You just meant you want to control how I look," I'd interrupt, making him the bad guy for noticing that his wife was suddenly dressing to seduce another man. The cruelest manipulation was how I began withholding affection and intimacy as punishment for imaginary crimes. When Derek would try to be romantic or intimate, I'd reject him and then blame him for the rejection. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me during the day, I'd be more interested at night," I'd say coldly, even though Derek constantly tried to connect with me, and I was the one who had grown distant. I was training Derek to believe that our marriage problems were his fault, that my coldness was a response to his inadequacy, that my unhappiness was something he had caused. Meanwhile, I was giving all my passion and affection to another man. "I feel like I'm losing you," Derek said one night, reaching for my hand across the dinner table. Did I do something wrong? Instead of reassuring him or being honest about my own failures, I twisted the knife. "You're being needy and dramatic. Maybe that's the problem. You're too insecure to handle being married to someone who's growing and changing." I was making this good man question his own sanity while I destroyed our marriage from the inside. "I'm so proud of how dedicated you are to your career," Derek said one evening as I prepared for another fake work event. "I love seeing you passionate about something." If only he knew that my passion was directed entirely toward another man. The first time Ethan kissed me, we were in his car after another one of our innocent lunches. The conversation had grown more intimate, more charged, and when he leaned across the center console and captured my lips with his, I didn't resist. That kiss was everything my marriage had stopped being: urgent, desperate, forbidden. Ethan kissed me like he was drowning, and I was air, like he couldn't get enough of me, like I was the most desirable woman on earth. "God, Jessica," he breathed against my lips, You're incredible. You're everything I've been looking for my entire life. No one had ever kissed me like that. Derek was a gentle, loving kisser, but this was something else entirely. Raw passion, uncontrolled desire, the kind of intensity I'd only read about in novels. We can't, I whispered weakly, even as my body was responding to his touch in ways it hadn't responded to anyone in years. I know, he said, his hands tangling in my hair, but I can't stop myself. You're like a drug, Jessica. I'm addicted to you. The affair escalated quickly after that. What started as stolen kisses became stolen hours, then stolen afternoons, then entire days spent in Ethan's apartment while Derek thought I was at work and the children thought I was being a responsible mother. Being with Ethan physically was like discovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. He made me feel beautiful, sensual, powerful. He would tell me how perfect my body was, how incredible I felt, how I drove him wild with desire. He would touch me like I was precious and ravage me like I was irresistible. "You're so beautiful," he would whisper as we lay tangled in his sheets. "I can't believe someone like you exists. I can't believe you're here with me." With Derek, our physical relationship had become comfortable, routine, predictable. We made love like a married couple, gentle, familiar, satisfying, but not earth-shattering. With Ethan, every encounter felt like the first time, like a revelation, like the most important thing that had ever happened to me. But it wasn't just the physical aspect that addicted me to Ethan, it was the way he made me feel about myself. Around Derek, I had become a wife and mother first, Jessica second. Around Ethan, I was a fascinating, desirable woman who happened to have other responsibilities. The worst part is how I began to actively sabotage Derek's attempts to show love. When he would bring me flowers from the grocery store after working a 12-hour day, I'd roll my eyes and say things like, "Gas station flowers again? How romantic." I would compare them openly to the expensive arrangements Ethan sent, crushing Derek's spirit deliberately. "I work all day to provide for this family," Derek would say quietly, hurt evident in his voice. "I'm sorry the flowers aren't fancy enough." "That's exactly the problem," I'd snap back. "You think the bare minimum is enough. Other husbands actually put thought into romantic gestures." I was using Derek's own love against him, weaponizing his efforts to make him feel inadequate. When he'd try to plan date nights within our budget, I'd complain that we never went anywhere nice. When he'd suggest family activities, I'd sigh dramatically and act like spending time with him and our children was a burden. Even worse, I started deliberately undermining him in front of the children. When Derek would discipline Sophie or Jake, I'd swoop in and contradict him. "Daddy's being mean again," I'd tell them, making myself the fun parent and him the bad guy. I was systematically destroying his authority and relationship with his own children just to make myself feel superior. "You have no idea how special you are," Ethan would tell me as we spent entire afternoons talking in his apartment. "You're brilliant, beautiful, funny, passionate. Any man would be lucky to have you." The implication was clear. Derek didn't know how lucky he was, didn't appreciate what he had, was somehow failing to recognize my worth. It was a lie that fed my ego and justified my betrayal. Ethan would ask me about my dreams, my ambitions, my desires for the future. "What would you do if you could do anything?" he'd ask. "Where would you live? How would you spend your days?" These were conversations Derek and I used to have when we were younger, but parenthood and responsibility had replaced dreams with practical concerns. Ethan made me remember the woman I used to be, the woman I thought I could still become, if only I wasn't tied down to a life that suddenly felt ordinary. The deeper I fell into the affair, the more I had to justify my actions to myself. I couldn't acknowledge that I was simply being selfish and destructive, so I created an elaborate narrative where I was the victim and Derek was somehow to blame. "He never really talks to me anymore," I would tell Ethan, conveniently forgetting that Derek tried to talk to me every single day, but I was the one who had grown distant and dismissive. "We're like roommates, not lovers," I would say, ignoring the fact that Derek still tried to be romantic and intimate, but I was the one who had become cold and unresponsive. "He doesn't understand me," I would claim, despite Derek knowing me better than anyone and loving me exactly as I was or as I used to be. Ethan was the perfect audience for these complaints. He would nod sympathetically and tell me I deserved better, that I was too special to be taken for granted, that any man who couldn't appreciate me didn't deserve me. "You're wasted on someone who can't see your worth," he would say, stroking my hair as we lay in his bed. "You need someone who can match your intelligence, your passion, your sophistication." Every conversation with Ethan made Derek seem smaller by comparison. This man who had loved me unconditionally for over a decade, who worked tirelessly to provide for our family, who would have done anything to make me happy, was being diminished in my mind by a manipulator who told me exactly what I wanted to hear. Living a double life became my new addiction, but what made me truly despicable was how I began using my children as tools to manipulate Derek and cover my tracks. When Derek would question why I was always unavailable for family activities, I'd use Sophie and Jake as shields. "The kids need me to be successful so they can have nice things. Would you rather I quit working and we lose the house?" I was making Derek feel guilty for wanting his wife present while I was actually off betraying our family. I was using our children's future as justification for destroying their present. Even worse, I started coaching the children to lie for me without them realizing it. "If Daddy asks where Mommy went, tell him I had to run errands," I'd say casually, turning my innocent children into unwitting accomplices to my affair. When Sophie would ask why I missed her school events, I'd blame Derek. "Daddy didn't tell me about it soon enough. You should ask him why he doesn't communicate better with Mommy." I was systematically poisoning my children's relationship with their father to cover my own negligence and betrayal. I was making Derek the villain in their minds, while I was the one abandoning them for my lover. The most evil thing I did was use the children's love for me to manipulate Derek's emotions. When he'd try to confront me about my behavior, I'd suddenly become devoted Mother Jessica in front of the kids. "Mommy loves you so much," I'd say loudly, hugging Sophie and Jake while Derek watched. "Mommy would never do anything to hurt our family." I was using our children as human shields, making it impossible for Derek to express his concerns without looking like the bad guy in front of kids who adored me. With Ethan, I felt like I was starring in my own romantic movie, funded by my husband's hard work and enabled by my children's innocent trust. I would spend entire afternoons in luxury hotels that Derek's construction work had paid for, while he picked up Sophie from school and helped Jake with homework. "Your husband is such a fool," Ethan would say as we lay in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than Derek made in a week. "He has no idea he's paying for his wife to cheat on him." I would laugh at that, finding it amusing rather than heartbreaking. I was entertained by my husband's ignorance, thrilled by my ability to deceive someone who trusted me completely. "Imagine waking up in Paris," he would whisper as we lay in his bed. "Having coffee in sidewalk cafes, visiting art galleries, making love in luxury hotels. That's the life you should be living." The life Derek had given me, suburban comfort, family vacations, steady love, suddenly seemed pale and boring by comparison. I was comparing reality to fantasy, and reality was losing every time. My obsession with Ethan began affecting my relationship with Sophie and Jake in ways that went beyond simple distraction. I became actively resentful of them for interfering with my fantasy life. When Sophie would ask for help with homework, I'd snap, "Can't you see I'm busy? Ask your father." When Jake wanted me to read him a bedtime story, I'd tell him, "Mommy has important work to do. Go find Daddy." But the important work was texting Ethan or planning our next meeting. I was rejecting my children's basic needs for love and attention because my lover was more important to me than my own kids. I started leaving them with babysitters constantly so I could meet Ethan. "Work emergency," I'd tell Derek, rushing out the door while Sophie cried because I was missing her school play again. "Critical client meeting," I'd lie, abandoning Jake's birthday party planning to Derek while I spent the afternoon in Ethan's bed. The most disgusting part was how I began to see my children as obstacles to my happiness. When Jake got sick and needed me to stay home, I was furious, not worried about my son, but angry that his illness was interfering with my affair. When Sophie needed help with a school project, I felt annoyed that she was taking time away from texting my lover. "Why can't you handle this?" I'd ask Derek when the kids needed something. "I have my own life too, you know." Derek was becoming a single parent while I was still living in the house. He was doing everything: cooking, cleaning, homework help, bedtime routines, while I was mentally and emotionally checked out, living for my next hit of Ethan's attention. Even worse, I started using the children as weapons against Derek. When he'd try to discipline them, I'd undermine him. Daddy's being unreasonable again. Come to mommy. I was deliberately damaging his relationship with his own children to make myself feel powerful and in control. You've been working so hard lately, Derek said one evening, rubbing my shoulders as I sat at the kitchen table pretending to work on my laptop while actually texting Ethan. I appreciate everything you're doing for our family. The irony was devastating. Derek was praising me for working hard when I was actually working hard to destroy our family. He was grateful for sacrifices I wasn't making while I was making the ultimate sacrifice of our marriage on the altar of my selfish desires. 6 months into the affair, I had become someone I wouldn't have recognized a year earlier. I was lying constantly, stealing significant amounts of money from our joint accounts, sharing Derek's most intimate secrets with my lover, and actively working to destroy Derek's self-esteem and relationship with our children. I was stealing thousands of dollars, money Derek had earned through backbreaking labor, to fund my fantasy life with Ethan. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, luxury hotel rooms, costly dinners. I even took money from our children's college funds to buy Ethan a $3,000 watch for his birthday. The kid's college account is lower than I thought, Derek said one evening, reviewing our finances. I might need to pick up more weekend work. Okay, I said carelessly, knowing I had stolen that money to pay for a romantic weekend with Ethan while Derek thought I was at a work conference. Even more cruel was how I began gaslighting Derek about his own worth. When he'd express insecurity about not having a college degree, instead of reassuring him like a loving wife should, I'd twist the knife deeper. Well, maybe you should have thought about that before dropping out, I'd say coldly. Some of us married beneath our potential. When Derek would try to discuss our growing distance, I'd make him feel crazy. You're being paranoid and needy. Maybe the problem is that you're too insecure to handle having a successful wife. I was systematically destroying this good man's confidence while having an affair behind his back. I made him feel inadequate as a husband while I was betraying him. I made him feel insufficient as a provider while I was literally stealing the money he earned. Tell me something about him that no one else knows, Ethan would ask during our post-sex conversations, hungry for ammunition against Derek. I would share Derek's deepest vulnerabilities: his fear that he wasn't smart enough for me, his guilt about his father's death, his worries about being a good father. I would mock Derek's tears, laugh at his insecurities, and turn his moments of genuine vulnerability into entertainment for my lover. He actually cried because he was worried he wasn't providing enough for us, I told Ethan, laughing as I described how Derek had broken down after a particularly stressful day at work. Can you imagine being that weak? But the cruelest betrayal was when I started actively sabotaging Derek's business. When potential clients would call our house, I'd be dismissive. He's just a small contractor. You might want someone more established. I was literally trying to destroy his livelihood while he was working to support me and our children. You're so much more sophisticated than he is, Ethan would tell me. You deserve someone who can appreciate your intellect, your complexity. He's probably never even read a book that wasn't required for school. It wasn't true. Derek was well-read and intelligent, just differently educated than Ethan. But I was so desperate to justify my affair that I let Ethan's words poison my perception of the man who loved me. What I didn't know was that Derek had been watching, questioning, investigating. The man I thought was too trusting and naive to catch me had been methodically documenting my betrayal for weeks. He had noticed the changes in my behavior: the way I guarded my phone, the expensive new clothes I claimed were work necessities, the fact that I was never available when he called during my supposed work hours. But instead of confronting me immediately, he had hired a private investigator to gather evidence. The night everything collapsed, I came home from an afternoon with Ethan still glowing from his attention, still high on the feeling of being desired and pursued. Derek was waiting in the kitchen with a manila folder that contained the destruction of our life together. How long? He asked quietly, and something in his voice told me he already knew everything. What do you mean? I tried to lie, but the look in his eyes stopped me cold. How long have you been cheating on me with Ethan Cross? The words hit me like a physical blow. Derek, 6 months, he said, opening the folder. 6 months of lies, stolen money, and betrayal. 6 months of you making me feel crazy for thinking something was wrong while you were destroying our marriage. He showed me photos of myself entering Ethan's apartment, credit card statements highlighting purchases I'd made for my lover, even recordings of phone conversations where I'd said horrible things about Derek to Ethan. I heard you tell him you wished you'd never married me, Derek said, his voice breaking, that you felt trapped by our life together, that you were only staying until you figured out how to leave. The cruelest part was that Derek had heard everything. Every insult, every mockery, every moment where I'd betrayed not just his trust but his very dignity. He knew that I hadn't just cheated on him, I had humiliated him with another man. As if the affair wasn't devastating enough, Derek's investigator had uncovered the truth about Ethan Cross. Everything I thought I knew about him, everything I had risked my marriage for, was a lie. Ethan wasn't the successful businessman he claimed to be. He was a professional con artist who specialized in seducing married women, particularly wives of blue-collar workers who felt above their husbands. He had done this before in multiple cities, always with the same pattern. He's married, Derek said, showing me a photograph of Ethan with a woman and 3 children. His real name is Eddie Kowalski, and his wife thinks he's traveling for business when he's really targeting women like you. Every word Ethan had said to me, every gesture of romance, every declaration of love, all of it had been calculated manipulation. I had destroyed my marriage for a man who saw me as nothing more than another mark, another conquest in his long line of victims. He's not even divorced, Derek continued, his voice flat with exhaustion. The stories about his ex-wife, his travels, his sophisticated lifestyle, all lies. He lives in a studio apartment and drives a leased car. Everything about him is fake. I had given up everything real for something completely artificial. I had betrayed a man who loved me unconditionally for someone who felt nothing for me at all. The final humiliation came when Derek showed me recordings the investigator had made of Ethan talking to his real wife on the phone. She's just another bored housewife, I heard Ethan say about me. Easy money and easier entertainment. These suburban wives are all the same, desperate for attention and dumb enough to believe any line you feed them. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. With all the evidence Derek had gathered, I had no hope of receiving custody of the children or a significant portion of our assets. I had committed adultery, stolen money, and emotionally abandoned my family. No judge was going to look favorably on my choices. Derek got primary custody of Sophie and Jake, the house we had built together, and most of our savings. I was left with child support payments I could barely afford and visitation rights with children who could barely look at me. The community that had once embraced me as Derek's wife now saw me as the woman who had destroyed a good man's life. Friends chose sides, and they chose Derek, as they should have. I was ostracized from the social circles I had once enjoyed, branded as a cheater and a homewrecker. My new reality was a small apartment across town, working full-time at a job that barely covered my expenses. The children visited reluctantly, spending most of their time asking when they could go back to Daddy's house. Sophie, at 10, was old enough to understand what I had done and young enough to feel personally betrayed by it. "You chose him over us," she said during one of our awkward visitation dinners. "You chose a stranger over your own family." Jake, at 7, didn't fully understand the specifics but knew that Mommy had done something that made Daddy very sad and broke up their family. He became clingy with Derek and distant with me, as if he was afraid I might disappear again. While I was learning to live with the consequences of my choices, Derek was rebuilding his life with the grace and dignity he had always possessed. He threw himself into being a single father, giving Sophie and Jake all the love and stability I had failed to provide. The children thrived under his sole care. Their grades improved, they seemed happier, and they developed an even deeper appreciation for their father's unconditional love. Derek had become their hero, the parent who stayed, who fought for them, who put them first. After a year, Derek began dating Amy, a kindergarten teacher who adored the children and treated Derek with the respect and appreciation I had taken for granted. Watching them together was torture. Seeing Derek smile again, seeing him laugh, seeing him with someone who valued what I had thrown away. Amy was everything I should have been and everything I had failed to be. She was grateful for Derek's love, supportive of his work, devoted to the children. She saw Derek's worth immediately and never made him feel like he had to prove himself or earn her affection. When Derek and Amy got engaged 2 years after our divorce, I felt the full weight of what I had lost. This good man had found love again with someone who deserved him, while I was alone with the ruins of the life I had destroyed. There was no redemption in my story, no moment of forgiveness, no happy ending where Derek took me back and we rebuilt our marriage. Some betrayals cut too deep, some damage is too extensive to repair. I had made my choices, and I had to live with them forever. But even after losing everything, I continued to show my true character. During the divorce proceedings, I tried to manipulate the children against Derek one final time. I told Sophie that Daddy was being mean by taking her away from Mommy. I told Jake that if he really loved me, he'd tell the judge he wanted to live with me. Your father is trying to turn you against me, I would tell them during supervised visits, poisoning them against the parent who had actually sacrificed everything for them. When Derek started dating Amy, I became vindictive in ways that showed my complete lack of maternal instinct. I would pump the children for information about her, then use that information to try to sabotage their relationship. Does she cook as well as Mommy did? I'd ask Sophie. I bet she doesn't love you as much as I do. I was trying to make my own children feel disloyal for accepting love from a woman who was actually good for their father. I even tried to manipulate Derek's family against him. I called his mother and sister, painting myself as the victim. He kicked me out for no reason. He won't let me see my children. You know I was a good wife and mother. I was lying to people who had loved me like their own daughter, trying to turn Derek's support system against him while he was struggling to rebuild his life. The children grew up calling Amy Mom while referring to me by my first name. They invited her to school events and graduation ceremonies, while I watched from the back row like a distant relative. The family I had abandoned had replaced me completely, and they were better off for it. When Sophie got engaged, she asked Amy to help her pick out her wedding dress. Not me. When Jake graduated college, he thanked Derek and Amy in his speech but didn't even mention me. I had been completely erased from the family narrative, and it was entirely my own doing. But the most pathetic part was that I still felt entitled to their love and attention. I would show up to family events uninvited, expecting to be welcomed with open arms. I would send guilt-tripping messages. I'm still your mother, and you only have one real mom. I couldn't accept that I had forfeited my right to their love through my own choices. I had destroyed my family and then spent years trying to make everyone else feel guilty about the consequences of my actions. 20 years later, I can see my story with painful clarity. I was a woman who had everything: a loving husband, beautiful children, financial security, respect in the community, and I threw it all away for a fantasy that turned out to be a lie. Derek wasn't perfect, but he was real. His love wasn't always exciting, but it was constant. His attention wasn't always passionate, but it was genuine. His life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest and good, and built on a foundation of true commitment. I had confused routine with boredom, stability with stagnation, real love with the absence of romance. I had been so focused on what I thought I was missing that I couldn't see what I actually had. Ethan had given me excitement, but it was the excitement of deception. He had made me feel special, but only as a means to an end. He had promised me a better life, but he had no intention of actually providing one. Everything about our relationship had been built on lies, while everything about my marriage had been built on truth. The grass wasn't greener on the other side. It was artificial turf, designed to look appealing from a distance, but offering no real substance up close. I tell my story now not seeking sympathy or forgiveness, but as a warning to other women who might be tempted to make the same devastating choices. When you have a good man who loves you, appreciate him. When you have children who depend on you, protect them. When you have a life built on real love and commitment, don't risk it for the temporary high of someone else's attention. The excitement of an affair is just that: excitement, not love. The validation from a stranger means nothing compared to the steady devotion of a husband. The fantasy of a different life pales in comparison to the reality of a family that loves you. Derek deserved better than me. Sophie and Jake deserved better than me, and I deserved the consequences of my choices: loneliness, regret, and the knowledge that I destroyed something beautiful for absolutely nothing. If you're reading this and thinking about stepping outside your marriage, stop. Look at what you actually have instead of focusing on what you think you're missing. Talk to your husband instead of seeking validation elsewhere. Fight for your marriage instead of running from it. Because once you cross that line, once you betray that trust, there's no going back. And the price you'll pay is higher than anything you could possibly gain. I am Jessica, and I am a cautionary tale. I had a fairy tale marriage and turned it into a tragedy through my own selfishness and stupidity. I was loved completely and chose to seek love elsewhere. I was given everything and threw it away for nothing. This is my story, and it's a story every woman should learn from before she makes the same irreversible mistake. Love the man who loves you. Appreciate the life you've built together. And remember that the grass isn't greener on the other side. It's just different grass, and it's usually not even real. Don't be like me. Don't become the woman who lost everything for nothing. Don't destroy your family for a fantasy that will turn to ash in your hands. Learn from my mistakes, because I can promise you this: no amount of excitement is worth the lifetime of regret that follows.